Alright, so as we just went over earlier, today's verse is verse 27 of chapter 2. And verse 27, it's basically Krishna taking the argument from the soul is eternal and flipping it into, even if we're talking only about the cycle of birth and death, this is still the natural order of embodied life. And here's another little philosophical gotcha here, because Krishna is still continuing the strategy that he started in the verse from last week. In the verse from last week, so let's say he stood on this opinion, and then there's also this opinion, right? There's Arjun's opinion, and then there's Krishna's opinion. Krishna, he's still set on what he teaches, but he says, okay, even from your perspective, if we said what you said was true, it would still be incorrect, so my side is still right. Now Krishna is still doing that strategy back into chapter 2 and verse 27. So today's verse, Jatasya hi dhruvam mrityur dhruvam janmamritasya cha tasmad apariharyarthe natvam sochitum arhasi. So the core meaning of this verse is, for one who has been born, death is like absolutely certain. And for one who has died, birth is certain. Therefore, since this cycle of birth and death is unavoidable, you should not grieve over what cannot be prevented. So, if we're going to understand this, we have to first of all understand the setting of the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm saying this because there may be somebody new here that does not know this yet. Bhagavad Gita has started from the Pandava side. They have been rightfully asking for land that is theirs, and the Kauravas are refusing, and no matter how many peaceful messengers or basically you could say treaties were made, even then the Kauravas refused to step down, and that was why war ended up being inevitable. And after that, Arjun, he goes ahead and sees that all of his relatives, all of his family's friends, the teachers, his grandfather, everybody is on the opposing side. He has to fight his relatives, and that is exactly why he's saying, no, I do not want to fight, I do not want to kill my relatives. And here Krishna has been stuck on this point. He's been repeating it over and over and over so it can get drilled into his brain that the soul is immortal, and no matter, even if the body is killed, the soul will still stay alive, because the soul is on a different level of consciousness than the body. So the soul remains alive, the soul was never born, the soul will never die. Yet the same thing does not happen with the body. The body has a born date, the body has an end date. So what I'm trying to say is, for those of you guys who are new here, you guys should know the full backstory before jumping straight into this, because it would be slightly confusing if you start from here. So in the previous verse, Arjun, he went ahead and he's been saying, I don't know how to explain this. Krishna was being slightly backhanded with Arjun, because the core meaning from that verse was, but if you think that the soul is constantly born and constantly dies, even then, Arjun, you should not grieve like this. So Krishna is still saying, even if your point was correct, even if you think the soul was constantly born and constantly dies, even then you should not grieve for who you're about to kill just like that, because there is no reason for sorrow there. So now that I've brought that up, we're moving back to 227, where Krishna is still in the same strategy. He's still using what Arjun thinks is happening, and he's still using that, and he's still debunking what Arjun thinks, and he's proving himself right by using the opponent's basically point of view, you could say. And this verse, it's incredibly important because Krishna is now making a distinction between the eternal self. By the way, anytime I say the eternal self, know that I mean the soul, okay? This verse is important because Krishna is making a huge distinction between the soul in the cycle of existence. So we have this cycle, and it's called the cycle of birth and death. Now, this cycle has been going on forever and ever and ever, and you've must have been like born so many times to finally get this human body that you have at the moment. You could have been born as what, an insect, a cockroach, an animal, a butterfly, I don't know, anything. And after that, after the millions of times that you have been born, you've finally gotten this human body. So that is the cycle of birth and death. And our goal in this human life is to get out of the cycle of birth and death. So here in 220, Krishna has says that the soul is never born and that the soul never dies. And now in this verse, in verse 27, he also says, for one who is born, death is not certain. Now before you get confused, Krishna did just say that the self or the soul isn't born. Yes, he did. And that's exactly the point, because Krishna is speaking about the embodied being, or by that I mean Krishna is speaking about the body, and he's not claiming that the soul itself is born and dies. The body enters the cycle of birth and death, but the soul does not. This distinction is really, really important. So make sure you guys are remembering this. The soul is not born, the soul does not die. The body is born, the body does die. So, Jatasya hi dhruvo mrityuhu. That means for who has been born, death is absolutely certain. Now, the word dhruva means certain, fixed, unavoidable. Krishna isn't saying that death is likely, it might happen. No, he's saying if something has entered material birth, its material form will eventually end. And in simpler terms, he's basically saying if something is born, that something dies. There are no exceptions. Every single human being was born, and every single human being will die. Every animal, every plant, every material organism. Birth carries the seed of death, and death carries the possibility of another birth. This is the cycle of birth and death. But isn't this sort of depressing? It's actually not, because Krishna is trying to do something really different here. He's teaching Arjuna to stop fighting against reality, because reality is, you're not immortal. You're not gonna live past like 140 or something unless it's an absolute miracle, which I 100% doubt would happen. Death is certain, and I'm not trying to scare you, but it's just reality here. He's teaching Arjuna that it's certain, it's gonna happen either way. It's like reality. They're not in some fantasy world at the moment. Arjuna is grieving because he wants a reality where the people he loves can remain physically present forever. But Krishna says that was never the nature of the human body that we have. The body was always temporary. So, the problem wasn't that the body was temporary. The problem is expecting the temporary to behave like it's fully immortal and eternal, which is not. And that is when the suffering becomes intensified, because you believe that, okay, maybe I'll just live longer, maybe death isn't that unavoidable. No, you honestly never know. You could literally die tomorrow and you wouldn't know. So, yes, death is like extremely, how do I say this? Death is like extremely certain. It's unavoidable. You can't do anything around it. So, dhruvam janma mritasyata, meaning, and for one who has died, birth is certain. And now Krishna introduces the other half of the cycle. At first, in Jatasya hi dhruvam mrityu, he said, for one who has been born, death is certain. But now, in the second part of the cycle, he says, dhruvam janma mritasyata, and for one who has died, birth is certain. So, birth eventually leads to death. Death eventually leads to birth. This is the repeated cycle of birth and death. That is something that I will be saying a lot today. The soul doesn't simply just disappear after the body dies. the body does end, but the journey does not. And this, it directly connects to verse 22. The person changes bodies like someone changes clothes. Now, if you want context here, verse 22, he compares the soul changing bodies to a person changing clothes. When clothes get old, maybe torn, maybe they have a big stain and that stain cannot come out. You don't want that like shirt or whatever you're wearing. You don't want that anymore, right? You want to go ahead and change clothes. You don't grieve a shirt because you know it's like it's not going to stay forever, right? It's the same with the body. The soul is the one thing that eventually does stay forever. The body, in this case, that's not true. So, just like a person changes old clothes, the soul changes old bodies. So, this verse 27, it's almost taking that clothing analogy and translating it into the language of the cycle of birth and death. The old body, it ends, and then there's a new body that begins. The traveler continues from that journey. And by this, I mean the soul is the traveler. So, remember the 6 stages of material existence that we discussed in verse 20? Yeah, it's back. So, every material body, it undergoes birth, existence, growth, transformation, decline, and destruction. Now, anything material can be affected by this. Every material body, even us, we also undergo this. Because you were born, right? You have existed. You have grown. You are going to transform. And then you are going to decline. And then you are going to die. Like, that's just how it works. And verse 27, it focuses especially on the first and the last, birth and death. These are the 2 points that scare Arjun the most, which is why this verse is focusing specifically on the first part and the 6th part. But Krishna's larger teaching here, what Krishna is truly trying to teach, is one who is born must die. You can't avoid dying. He is describing the low governing embodied existence, basically. He's just describing us. Now, if you want to use an example here, think about a flower. A flower appears, a flower may bloom. It reaches its peak, it begins to wilt, and eventually it's going to fall apart and it may decompose. What would we call the flowers fading a cosmic injustice? No, we would not. It's simply just the nature of a flower. Birth, grow, bloom, peak, wilt, die. And if it doesn't seem so serious for the flower, it's the same thing for us. That's why Krishna is saying the body is similar. The mistake is expecting something immortal from something that can only give you something like something temporary. So, what does Sankaracharya think here? He thinks that this verse continues Arjun's hypothetical reasoning from 226. Because remember, Krishna has already fully established that the self or the soul does not born, does not die, and it's fully eternal. So here, Sankaracharya, he thinks that Krishna is saying, even if you insist on looking at the other point, your grief still does not solve anything. Even if you insist looking at it a different way, you're still wrong. That's basically what he's saying. If birth necessarily leads to death, then death cannot be treated as an unexpected violation of reality, because you knew it was happening. You knew you could not have avoided it. It is inherent in embodied existence or our existence. But Sankaracharya's larger teaching remains that the soul is beyond the cycle of birth and death. The soul is not born, the soul does not die, okay? Remember that. Ramanujacharya, he thinks that this verse, it comes from the framework of repetition. The individual soul is eternal. We've been repeating that a lot. But while it remains connected with the material existence, it experiences different conditions than the body. Because the birth is not the creation of the soul, death is not the destruction of the soul. birth is the creation of the body, death is the destruction of the body. Birth refers, if we're going to look at the soul's point of view, birth refers to having a new soul in another body. Now, if we're going to keep that point of view, death refers to leaving the current body for a new body. And that just continues. It just goes ahead in a cycle and a cycle and a cycle. And now comes the most important part. Tasmada pariharyarthe, therefore, regarding what cannot be avoided. Krishna is saying here, just don't care about that. He's just saying, don't destroy yourself emotionally over something that you cannot prevent. There's a difference between feeling grief and being fully consumed by grief. There's a difference between, I'm sad that someone is gone, and this really should not have existed, and I cannot function because death exists. Krishna wants Arjuna to move on from this side, this should not exist, to I am sad that someone is gone. Because feeling grief is better than being fully consumed in grief. Now, the psychology in this verse. Think about how humans respond to inevitability. I apologize, I can barely say that word. We know that everybody ages, we know that everybody eventually dies. But despite that, we still feel sorrow and we still feel consumed by grief when one of our loved ones eventually pass away or eventually die. Emotionally, we act as though these facts, we act as if everybody ages and everybody actually dies. We act as if our loved ones are affected by this. We accept the rule intellectually, but when reality actually touches you, you guys resist it. That's exactly what Arjuna is feeling, because he understands that obviously warriors, they're going into war, they're most likely going to die. But for him, these aren't strangers, they're teachers, relatives, elders, friends, grandparents. These are people that he has grown up with, right? His emotional attachment here, it makes understanding that death is inevitable feel unacceptable. Krishna does not shame Arjuna for loving them and not wanting them to die. He teaches them to understand that love without being, he teaches him how to understand that love without, what am I trying to say? Krishna teaches Arjuna to understand love without love being destroyed by the fear of them dying. Now, close your eyes and imagine sitting beside a river. You know that the river will eventually flow into the ocean. But that does not mean that you can command it. That does not mean that you can simply say, stop moving, and the river just freezes in the air and stops moving to the ocean. No, that's just not how it works. You could spend your entire life screaming at the current, commanding the current to stop, but the river simply won't care. Or you can go ahead onto the other side and understand the nature of the river. You can learn how to navigate the river. You can appreciate what the river gives you while accepting that the river is eventually going to move into the ocean. Krishna is teaching Arjuna something similar about our embodied material body. You cannot stop the cycle by grieving, and understanding allows you to navigate it. This verse, this is something really important. This verse isn't Krishna telling Arjuna, since everybody dies, just do whatever you want. Absolutely not. Instead, Krishna is telling Arjuna, because life is temporary, what you do with your life truly does matter. Arjuna has a duty, he has a role, he has responsibilities that he is needed to fulfill. His fear of death has made him want to abandon these responsibilities that eventually are his own duty. Krishna is telling him, don't allow attachment to prevent you from doing what is right. And that idea, it becomes truly really important later in the Gita when Krishna develops Karma Yoga. And it's a really important bridge into the next verse, because here's a little foreshadowing. Krishna is about to say that beings are unmanifest before birth, manifest during life, and unmanifest again after death. The argument is basically leveling up once again. Thank you.